Well, good morning. It's great to be with you all again. You know, every time I come here, you fill this room more. I'm going to have to get to the point of not inviting the fire marshal, which is a good problem to have. But thank you all for having me here with you today. And you know, we've got 2 more weeks left in the session, and then I think you can expect to see the campaigns, plural, pick up another level. Veto session will go up again. For the governor's race, my observation of running with Bob McDonnell in 2009 is you hit full dead sprint earlier than the other races, in part because both, for the first time in 16 years, both parties have pretty much settled on their nominee. And also, it's just the nature of the top of the ticket. And we, of course, don't have a nomination contest this year for the governor's race now, and I'll touch on that a little bit more here in a moment. But that has allowed us to turn to the general election, at least in terms of structure and building our infrastructure, our campaign infrastructure, early instead of in late May and early June. We started to do this in December. Now it's a little difficult in some ways, rolling into Christmas and New Year's. But even so, it is better to be able to do it early, and we'll come back to you all. The campaign will come back to you. Colby's here somewhere. Where is he? In the back. You'll see Colby plenty. And we'll come back to you all with a grassroots plan that we'd like to plug you all into. And I would agree that last year we saw more volunteer hours, effort, heart, than we've ever seen in Virginia before on the Republican side. I will say, without being too critical, that I think that it could have been utilized more efficiently. You all know when you were in the call centers and when you were doing door knocking, you were given scripts that you were expected to stick to rather strenuously. And scripts are great when you're making calls if you've never made calls before, for about the first 5 calls, until you get your own feel for how to communicate with folks. And when we got to the end, I would stand in a few victory centers right next to the Romney folks. I know they appreciated it tremendously. And say, look, throw away the script. Tell people why you are voting for Mitt Romney, why you are voting for George Allen, and ask them what questions they've got. You'll be amazed how many of their questions you can answer. And even better than that, when you cannot answer the question, you make it your mission to get the answer to that question, and then you have bought yourself the nearly unheard of in grassroots politics. They want you to call them back. They want you to call them back. So you have bought yourself another free human contact there, another opportunity to try to persuade people to vote for our ticket. And we have great folks running for LG and AG. We're going to have a spectacular ticket running across the state, and I'm very happy about that. But I also know, because of the effort and the heart I saw last year, that we have a lot of people who can do very, very well at advancing our team. And many of you did last year, many of you did in 2009, and I personally thank you for that, because as I have been in all 4 of my elections, that being the 4th, we were outspent. It's not been a goal, it's just worked out that way, mind you. And we rely on people like you all who share commitment to principles to help carry us over the line. And you all did that in 2009 very effectively. It is amusing here. I'm a UVA engineering graduate. I've got family in and around Charlottesville. It was the lowest performing locality for me in the whole state. I think I got 18%. So we're gunning for 20 this time. And I door knocked. And we door knocked in Charlottesville too. I did personally. But, you know, that's okay. It's all about margins and where you can win. And obviously we did well in Albemarle, relatively speaking. Of course, relatively speaking, we did well everywhere. But this year, You will hear us focusing on the same thing you heard Bob McDonald focusing on. The number one priority for voters is going to be economic opportunity and the ability to lead in that area. And I think you're going to see a stark contrast between myself and Terry McAuliffe. Well, on a lot of things, but on this one here, that's going to be the most important to voters of all. And then number two, I am a Northern Virginian and still am a Northern Virginian. I'm the first person that I know of that didn't move to Richmond when he became Attorney General, or she became Attorney General. And number two is going to be transportation, regardless of how this session works out. And it's still possible that they could get take a step forward in transportation, but the realm of discussion is such that there'll be plenty left to do when we get through that. And characteristic of me, I'm going to make this very detailed. I don't mean today, but when we lay this out, it's going to be very, very detailed and comprehensive. You know, people have talked about tax reform, for instance, for 20 years, for as long as I can remember. And no one has ever laid a plan on the table to do it while they were running for governor. Well, we're going to do that. We're going to do that. We're going to be aiming to increase growth and opportunity, to encourage innovation and risk-taking, and make Virginia an even better place to do business and to raise a family. We're also going to put a detailed proposal on the table for transportation. And this is reaching a point now in some parts of our Commonwealth where we're losing business opportunities. We're losing economic opportunities because our infrastructure, specifically transportation, has not kept up with what we've needed. We have a disconnect between the state and the local governments in terms of our various responsibilities that affect transportation. We also do not have enough funding there. If you look at if you graph everything the state government does over, pick your time period, 5, 10, 20, 30 years, all the curves just go up, go up, go up, except transportation stays flat. And the other curves really went up for much of that time faster than population plus inflation. The government was growing faster than everything else. Not necessarily a good thing, but transportation was not. And that's something that we need to bring more in alignment with the rest of the budget. Some of the proposals, for instance, moving some more dollars over from the general fund that you see this session play a role in that. But there's a lot of other things that are going to be necessary as well. We will address on kind of a rolling basis things like K through 12 education, which we do well in Virginia, but not everywhere, and that we need to make sure that we don't just, as I think some sort of union influences would prefer, that they want to see change, such as it is, be so slow that they effectively are willing to sacrifice years and years and years worth of children through school, frankly, to avoid serious reform. And we see that resistance all over the place. We're going to push back on that. We're going to fight that. And then higher ed, you know, my oldest is in college now. We went through the sticker shock. Everybody goes through it the first one, and it is sticker shock. And I believe that not just from our experience, but from the numbers, universities are pricing middle-class families out of a college education. The middle class is facing a very severe choice. For the first time that I remember, people are literally having the discussion, is it worth going to college? Just as a value proposition. And I think it's important that people ask those questions, but it's unfortunate that they've been pushed to that point. And our universities are carrying a lot of debt, nearly universally. We have built ourselves into a long-term problem. There's not a financial solution to that that's a 4-year solution. They need to get on a different path. a more sustainable financial path. Does this sound familiar? Someplace else, you know. But it's very true, and it's true for all our universities. They're in different circumstances in their abilities to do it, but they all need to do it. And then a sidestep in other places, but not in the Albemarle, Charlottesville area, property rights. You all have the dubious distinction of being one of those places that keeps these subjects most interesting over the years. And Agenda 21 and is rolled into that as well. You know, I heard mention of ICLEI. Thankfully, membership in that has been going down across the state, which is a trend I'd like to see. We had some legislation last year that was successful to roll back certain pieces of that agenda at the state level, and of course the property rights amendment passing with 74% of the vote, even while Virginia re-elected President Obama, and while the Democrats on their sample ballots were suggesting people vote no. To still get 74% tells me that Virginians are still in touch with their first principles. And that protection is now where it belongs, in the state constitution. And it took 8 years of work to get there, and taking on virtually every moneyed interest in Virginia politics. But we got there. We got there. And with a lot of help. It was very bipartisan. Wouldn't have come out of the P&E subcommittee, I know Steve remembers, without pre-deeds vote. He was critical to getting it out onto the floor. Johnny Joannou, Democrat over in the House, credited with giving one of the best speeches since Patrick Henry was in the House of Burgesses to keep it alive a couple of years back. And of course, the Republican support that grew. It is not universal Republican support in the General Assembly, or at least it wasn't. We made our way there. We made our way there, and it was a very good thing to accomplish. It's a little silver lining in last November's outcome. We need such a silver lining, and of course, with Virginia's merciless political calendar, we turn immediately to statewide races. And I can tell you, as somebody calling around and talking to people about the governor's race, about 2013, I have never encountered the kind of just worn out, not defeatist, but defeated mentality emotionally, spiritually. People were very disheartened after November 6th, and I was too. But we don't have the option, in Virginia especially, of spending a lot of time dwelling on losing. If we're going to win, we need to turn right back around and shake it off and step it up for the next year. And so that's what I've been trying to do, and that's what I'm going to ask each of you all to do, and to drag more people in to do. Because we win by growing. We win by building. That's how we're going to win. And I mentioned, half-jokingly, that I've been out spending all 4 of my elections. And I remember the first 3 of those were state senate races in Fairfax. It's not like I was in easy territory. And I mean, as a conservative in Fairfax, I was covered by the Endangered Species Act. And thankfully, you get something good out of that. But, you know, all of this will go on for me while staying in office, and you're welcome to ask about that, but I said I was going to do that when I was running in 2009, and I'm going to do that. I'm going to keep my word. We continue to carry forward the same way in the AG's office that I have all 3 years. Last month, we beat the Environmental Protection Agency. I refer to the EPA as the Employment Prevention Agency, because they're so good at that. But we beat them with a co-plaintiff, the Democrat Board of Supervisors of Fairfax County, in a water case up there that, had we lost, would have cost the taxpayers of Fairfax approximately $250 million, and VDOT another $70 million for one creek One creep. You got any creeps around here? Yeah. They'd have been looking for you too, which was kind of the point. This was an experimental attempt by the EPA to massively span its regulatory reach. It was completely illegal, and the judge agreed. The judge agreed. And it occurred to me, only the night before we went into court, I argued this case. It was in Alexandria, the Eastern District of Virginia. And it occurred to me that this was the first time that in all of our federalism fights that we've been in, that all three levels of government were parties, not merely amici or having an interest, but the defendant was the federal government, the EPA. The plaintiffs were the Commonwealth of Virginia, through VDOT, and Fairfax County, through their Board of Supervisors. All three levels of government in the same courtroom contending, well, 2-on-1 with one another. And this was our second lawsuit against the EPA. The first one is still going in D.C. Circuit. And when we brought that case, 4 Democrat attorneys general were our co-plaintiffs. So these are not partisan undertakings. These are defenses of the rule of law itself against a dramatically overreaching federal government, where they are willing to break the law. They do it over and over and over. Also, last month, we saw a constitutional ruling against this administration when their 3 National Labor Relations Board's appointments were found not to be properly appointed. They weren't recess appointments. That's a constitutional violation, not merely a statutory violation like the EPA. That is a very interesting outcome. I'm sure it'll get appealed to the Supreme Court, but it was a 3-0 ruling. It was a 3-0 ruling. It was pretty sweeping. Our EPA win. I wouldn't, and I hardly ever say this, I wouldn't change a sentence in that judge's order. It was absolutely sweeping. And they have till early March to decide whether to appeal that or not. But it was so sweeping that the judge sort of threw in a page that I interpreted as saying, even if you appeal this thing and win and get it sent back, you're probably going to lose on the second question when we get to that. And that is not terribly common, to tell you. That is just not very common. And it was that sweeping a ruling. It was only 8.5-page ruling. But to give you an idea of how these federalism fights matter, 2 hours after I got that ruling and read it, digested it, I called Chris Koster. Chris Koster is the Democrat Attorney General of Missouri. And it was January 3rd when we got this ruling. And I said, hey, Chris, Happy New Year. He said, Happy New Year to you. I said, no, really Happy New Year. All right, what are you talking about? And I told him about the ruling. He said, oh, that's great, congratulations. And I said, you don't know, do you? And he said, I don't know what? I said, you don't know that the other 3 cases of this in the United States of America are all in Missouri? And he said, you're kidding. No, I'm not. No, I'm not. In Missouri, there are 3 local governments who are contending with it. And so they take that ruling immediately. Now, it's not precedent in the other courts, but when you've got a ruling like Judge O'Grady wrote in our case, by golly, you get it in front of your judge and quick. And he was very happy with me to have called. And it matters across the country because the standards, this is the whole point of the rule of law, it applies the same to everyone, everywhere, all the time. We're all equal under the law. And other states can use this to defend. And one of the changes that has, I believe, been brought about among attorneys general across the country during my 3 years is that we have shifted the paradigm somewhat of what people expect of their Republican attorney general. The Dems are going another way. But, and they didn't used to. We all used to stand up to the federal government together. That it was a state issue, it wasn't a party issue. So realize they left us, we didn't go another direction. But now, across the country, we see people running for Attorney General as Republicans, with a very constitutional focus, with a strong federalism focus to protect the rule of law and to protect us against the federal government, because it does do great harm when it overreaches as it has. In fact, I got to introduce all of the new attorneys general at RAGA, the Republican Attorney General's Association, and none of them were prosecutors. None of them. All three of them had come from other backgrounds, and which was, I thought, very fascinating, because when I started, everybody would have said, the model is you've got to be a prosecutor. I mean, you may have heard that at the 2009 convention if you were there. Apparently you don't. And there are other things we do. As much as we have done great on healthcare fraud, more child pornography convictions than ever before. We have done more aggressive work with gang prosecutions. All of those are important, and we've ramped all of them up in the AG's office. Nonetheless, this fight for the Constitution, for the rule of law, and to protect us from overreach by the federal government is something that I think has become a new model around the country, and that's a good thing. That is a very good thing for Virginia and for America. So as you all go forward here in 2013, mentally recovering from 2012, we're going to want you to jump in here soon. And we're going to have the apparatus in place relatively soon for you all to participate in starting to try to win the general election early. And obviously I don't mean actually win it early, but to put us in a position to win it early. We have to acknowledge what a good job the Democrats did on the ground in 2012. And we've got to contend with that. To be competitive, we've got to up our game on the ground. And the one thing about being outspent in 4 races, I think that it's reasonable to say that I'm among the best grassroots campaigners that we've got on our side of the aisle. And that starts with what you build, the structure you build, and how you run your campaign. We will run a grassroots-focused campaign that is going to rely on you all. We are going to be reliant on you all because of how we campaign. And with Terry McAuliffe on the other side, it seems fairly reasonable to expect to be outspent for 5 in a row. So it is interesting. In his last race in 2009, his biggest donor was a union. In this race so far, he's filed 1 report. Biggest donor, tied for biggest donor, was a union. And I think we're seeing a totally different type of a candidate from the Democrats than we've ever seen before. And maybe that's a good thing, maybe that's a bad thing. We'll find out in November, but it sure won't be boring. So there's no danger of that. The happiest people in Virginia are the political reporters this year. So with that, I'm happy to take some questions, but I want to thank you all in advance of this year, because we are going to need your help. And if we win this year, it's going to be because of the work that you all and others like you around Virginia are willing to do. So thank you very much.